Hey everyone, Alpha Eagle here again. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing well and may God bless you all. A black family moves into a new neighborhood. They quickly learn that most of their new neighbors are racists who hate them. Would they be justified in wanting to stay as far away from their new neighbors as possible? You wouldn't want to live next to people who hated you, would you? I should hope not. I mean, it's just common sense to stay away from people who hate you. So, if it's okay for a black family to want to get away from people who hate them, it would in turn be okay for any race of people to want to stay away from people who hate them, correct? Well, in a normal society, that would be okay, but for some reason it's racist if white people said that they don't want to live next to people who hate them. Because that's exactly what happened to Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, when he simply said that he wants to stay away from people who hate him. Now, I know I'm late to the party talking about this, but I think it's an important thing to talk about. Scott Adams was canceled. He lost his job, and all because he said something that anyone with any common sense would agree with. Again, who would want to live next to someone who hated them? Nobody. Who could possibly disagree with that? For those of you who don't know, Rasmussen had a poll that asked black people, is it okay to be white? 53% agreed, 26% disagreed, and 21% was not sure. Now, who wouldn't be sure about something like that? Either it's okay to be white or it's not. Nobody would be unsure about that. Scott Adams added these two numbers together, and rightfully so, since if you're not sure it's okay to be white, you are essentially saying that it's not okay to be white. So essentially, that's 47% of black people who hate white people. So according to this poll, nearly half of all black people are racists. Now, to be perfectly clear, this does not mean that all black people are racists. Scott Adams was the one who was called racist when he was the one calling out the racists. That's the backwards clown world we live in when someone who simply points out the blatant racism are the ones called racists. Amazing. Normally, when someone points out racism, they are called a hero. But when it's anti-white racism that gets called out, that person gets canceled. Amazing. So essentially, our society is saying that it's okay to be racist to white people. Again, amazing. Now, critics of Scott Adams will say, well, the poll is misleading. The numbers are not at all accurate. Now, these critics are the same people who would cite polls themselves as gospel if the same polls supported their ideology. So, for one, those people are hypocrites. Anyone who said that this poll is misleading has just forfeited their right to cite any poll ever again. And if they do, remind them of what they said about this poll. Tell them that the poll they cite is misleading and you're not going to believe it. And two, let's say that they are right and the poll is misleading. Doesn't matter. The fact is, some black people are racists. That's an undeniable fact. Even if it's less than 26% of black people who are racists, that's still 26% too many. That number should be zero, period. People would say that Scott Adams said that all black people are a racist hate group, and that's a blatant lie. Scott Adams never used the word all when referring to black people. He was specifically referring to that 47% of black people who are racist according to that specific poll. Now, if you're a black person who is not one of those 47% of racist black people, then Scott Adams was not talking about you. And if you're offended by what he said, then you're probably a racist black person. Now, let's hear from some black people and see what they think.
Public service announcement. Excuse me. If y'all didn't know, this is the MSC, and frankly, there's just too many white people in here, and this is a space for people of color. So just be really cognizant of the space that you're taking up, because it does make some of us POCs uncomfortable when we see too many white people in here. It's only been open for 4 days, and frankly, there's the whole university for a lot of y'all to be at, and there's very few spaces for us. So keep that in mind. Thank you. Woo!
Okay, so here we have a black woman telling white people they need to leave. Basically, that white people are not welcome here. When has something like this ever happened in history? Does this remind you of anything at all? Anything, anybody? This woman is advocating for segregation based on race, which is extremely racist. This was way worse than what Scott Adams had said, and I'll explain why. Number one, Scott Adams said that he didn't want to live next to anyone who hated him, that he would voluntarily move away from people who hated him. So he was not advocating for racial segregation. The woman, on the other hand, is demanding that white people leave her space. She is advocating for racial segregation. She has planted her flag and claimed this space for herself. It's not hers, but she has claimed it. Scott Adams never demanded that others leave. He voluntarily chose to leave. He's not demanding anybody do anything. She is. See the difference? Number two, Scott Adams also gave his reason for wanting to leave. He is getting away from people who he knows hates him. The only reason she gave is because she's uncomfortable around white people. We should ask, why is she uncomfortable around white people? This is her problem, not white people's problem. Three, Scott Adams never said all black people. He specifically said that he wanted to get away from the 47% of racist black people who hate white people. And only said white people. She didn't specifically say racist white people, and since she didn't specify which white people she's talking about, simply saying white people suggests all white people. So, since it's clear that she is racist and hates all white people and advocates for racial segregation, why wasn't she canceled? In fact, this woman was applauded for her racism. Why is that? Why didn't she lose her job? Why wasn't she expelled from this college? Does anyone have a guess? Can anyone spot the difference between this woman and Scott Adams? Scott Adams spoke about Don Lemon. Let's hear what Don Lemon said about black neighborhoods.
Respect where you live. Start small by not dropping trash, littering in your own communities. I've lived in several predominantly white neighborhoods in my life. I rarely, if ever, witness people littering. I live in Harlem now. It's an historically black neighborhood. Every single day I see adults and children dropping their trash on the ground when a garbage can is just feet away. Just being honest here.
Don Lemon can say negative things about black neighborhoods, and Don Lemon was never canceled. Don Lemon still has his job. Can anyone spot the difference between Don Lemon and Scott Adams? Anyone at all? What's the difference? Let's see what educator Brittany Cooper has to say about white people.
White people are committed to being villains in the aggregate, right? Because they are so corrupt. You know, their thinking is so morally and spiritually bankrupt. The thing I want to say to you is we got to take these motherfuckers out. Just having to deal with white folks and the travesties that they create in the sense that they want to destroy the planet.
That was an extremely racist thing to say about white people. Why wasn't Brittany Cooper canceled? Why did she keep her job? By the way, her job is to teach white people to hate themselves. So why was Scott Adams canceled and Brittany Cooper was not? Again, can anyone spot the difference between Scott Adams and Brittany Cooper? Anyone at all? Don't be shy, make your guess. Berg made some racist comments, but she was just suspended and not fired. Why was she suspended, yet Scott Adams was fired? Can you spot the difference between Scott Adams and Whoopi Goldberg? Other people like Gina Carano and Roseanne Barr made controversial statements and they were both fired. What do they have in common with Scott Adams? Can you spot the similarities? Here is a comparison of people who made controversial statements and were fired and ones who were not fired. What are the differences between these people? Can anybody guess? Anybody at all? What can it possibly be? Is there a double standard? And the last thing I want to bring up is, what did Dilbert do? And what I mean by that is that technically it was the Dilbert comic strip itself that was canceled. But what offensive thing was in that comic strip? Regardless of what Scott Adams said, the comic strip itself is not controversial. And that's a big problem that I have. People like Scott Adams, Roseanne Barr, and Gina Carano were all fired for something they said that wasn't even said on the job. It was something that they said on their own personal social media. I'm a huge supporter of free speech, and I don't think people should be fired for something that they said outside of their job. I understand being fired for something that they said on the job, but what's said off the job shouldn't affect one's job. Again, people like Whoopi Goldberg and Don Lemon said their controversial statements on the job, and they still got to keep their job. They weren't fired. Again, does anybody see a pattern? Does anyone see a double standard? Anyway, that's about it for this video. I'm Alpha Eagle. God bless you for watching. God bless America, and I pray that more people see this double standard and fight back against this blatant anti-white, anti-conservative discrimination.